don't feel like making a full-fledged video. I'm really tired. And I had no idea how I could fit this in the books, but sitting here writing and thinking about the horse pasture next door, there used to be 2 horses over there, and they were kind of lanky and hungry looking. So a lot of times when I was out there in the garden, I'd pick some kale or carrots or whatever and just kind of go over there and give them some food. And one time, they really like being scratched and stuff. So one time I went over there through the barbed wire and I fed the one horse and I'm scratching him and whatever. It's giving him a little bit of joy in his life. And the dang horse stepped right on my foot. And I'm not a horse guy, but I've ridden a horse at least once. And that's kind of it. And so most of my experience with the horse is just feeding the horse next door, horses. And I had no idea how heavy these freaking animals are. And it's like I went from serene, peaceful, and one with nature to just level 10 on the intensity. And I'm like shouting at this horse, telling him to get off me and pushing him. And very quickly I'd escalated to like just wailing on this horse to get him off my foot. And which of course didn't do anything because it's a giant horse. And giant horses just kind of do whatever they want to do. So I was thinking about that, and it reminded me of a few things in life of the gospel. So there's this theme of intensity and how things that seem extreme may or may not be extreme. The example that I've thought about and talked about before is when the Lord made the whip and he cleared the temple of the money changers. That happened twice. And the onlookers thought, at least the crowds, they no doubt they thought that was really extreme. I've said before how if Jesus came and did things in a modern setting that followed the same principles as what he lived during his life, people would absolutely write him off as some kind of uber extremist. However, in our time and his ways are not extreme. They're the epitome of balanced, rational. It's just what is necessary. So what is fitting? What is right? What's fitting? What's measured? What's justified? So when someone is engaged in things that seem to be extreme, it's possible and likely that they are actually overreacting. But sometimes it's exactly what they ought to be doing. The difference isn't so much the appropriateness of what they're doing or how they're doing it. It's that they understand more or different than the observers. So there's this guy, Phineas, in the Old Testament, and at one point, the children of Israel, they're attacking people, conquering places, and they got the word that they had to take out a certain description of people, a certain range of people, and instead of listening to that, one of the princes in Israel, he spared a princess alive. And maybe a man, I don't remember. Anyway, at least one person who was royalty in that city. And Moses finds out and he's like, what the heck? That's a quote. It's in Deuteronomy. So he's like, what the heck? And, pretty forcefully explaining how this can't be. And so this guy Phineas, it's like Moses didn't even get to finish. Phineas grabs, I think he was Aaron's son. He grabs a spear and he runs through the woman and the Israelite who brought her back. And the Lord commends him right then and there in a very significant way for his zeal. So it wasn't just zeal out into the ether, it was zeal in obeying the specific commandment that they had received. Now, if you were there, maybe it'd be like, oh my gosh, this Phineas guy, he's nuts. He's so over the top. He's like loose cannon with the spear all the time. But the fact is that in that situation, if that had not happened, very, very bad things would have happened to the entire camp of Israel. And many people would have borne the negative consequences of that. Phineas knew, he did something about it. So let's go back to Jesus and why he was flipping out in the temple, whipping people, chasing them out, flipping over tables. There are a lot of people in that area, in the money-changing area. It's a busy place. And a lot of levels of understanding. If I'm not mistaken, the Gentiles could go into that part. I don't quite remember, but I think that's the case. And there's animals all over the place. It's a bustling place. So in addition to just common people, and then Israelites who are coming there to worship, money changers who were there all the time, guess who else was there? The rulers, the Pharisees, the dudes in charge. Now, the priests. All these people were there, scribes, Pharisees, priests. Now let me ask you something. This was the place that the priests ruled the roost. They had complete control of that area. Why didn't they arrest Jesus? You might say, well, they didn't want to cause an uproar. Okay, why didn't they say anything to him? If someone walked into your front door and like went straight to your living room or kitchen or entryway, whatever you got right there, and just started messing up your bookshelves, pulling out all your dishes from your cupboards, whatever, just trashing the place, would you just stand there in awe and just be like, oh, I don't know what's going on, but we'll just peacefully allow this dude to do whatever he wants? Of course not. You'd lose your mind, right? You just call people and try to tackle this crazy person trashing your house. So why did the priests just let this happen? The answer is they knew he was right. They knew he was right. It was their job to make sure that what was going on never happened. And they absolutely failed to do their job. So the priest's duties include, and I'm just talking general now, not just about Moses' priest, but a priest's job is to discern between what is good and what is evil, and to teach the people the same. So that's across the board. But now, they were in the temple, in their domain. They ruled that roost. And they had allowed this to decay and corrupt right before their eyes. You see, so it wasn't just that they were failing in teaching the people. If you want a good example of how they were supposed to do this, go read what John the Baptist says during his sermon that's recorded there in the New Testament. And these people come to him, and he rather roughly, he lays into people, helping them see that they're not not in such a great place spiritually as they thought. And the more the people in the crowd should have known that, the harsher he is. He lets loose on the Pharisees, calls them vipers, who hath warned thee of the judgment to come. So, but he talks to soldiers and he talks to taxmen. What are they asking him? They say, what should I change in my life to be straight with God? And he says, here's what you do. Here's what you do. Here's what you do. Because priests are the sword of the Lord. They cut. They discern what was not previously distinguished. They make a difference between right and wrong. That's what priests are meant to do with people. That's what priests definitely are meant to do in their own families, their own house. The temple was the Lord's house. They were the ones in charge of it. They were the ones appointed to keep it. That's, go back to Moses. God commands him to set apart the priests. They all have a duty in the house of the Lord to keep the thing running the way the Lord intends. So they all backed down. They all stood down. Let Jesus do it. Twice he did it. 2 separate times he did it. Because they knew he was right. But, and this is just, we read things like this, we hear things like this, and we think, oh, well, this is a really bad person. These are really bad people. Nope. Go look in the mirror. Go look in the mirror. These are people. It's a human problem. It's not a Pharisee problem. It's not whatever. It's not a bad guy problem. It's a human problem. It's something all of us have to overcome. So they stood. So tying. What am I talking about specifically with this example? They stood back because they knew it was right. But did it stop them from hating him? No. They hated him even more. Go read just pick a random chunk of the New Testament, the Gospels, the Gospels. Take a random chunk of one of them and just read it real quick, and here's the thing to look for. Look at how people reacted to Jesus when they saw obvious signs of God's power. Because you might think, they were doing the happy dance, right? Glory to God, because his powers come among us. No. Or, oh man, whoever is working these miracles must be someone who we can learn something about God from. No. Some people reacted that way, but it was rare. It was the minority of people. What happened instead? Fear. People reacted with fear. They recoiled from these things. Hatred. You'll see time and again where Jesus does this really obvious miracle or preaches really obvious wisdom. And someone there, and this is how you know the other folks are in big trouble. You can't excuse them thinking, well, maybe it just wasn't so obvious to us. People there would say, no one has ever said anything so wise. No one has ever opened the eyes of the blind, born blind. No one's ever done this or that. And yet, other people react to the same exact experience, immediately plotting how they're going to kill him. This is not the spirit of people who are, magical levels of evil. This is human nature, and it's in all of us. And that's what we have to overcome. This is the natural way to react to these things. Okay. So Jen asked, they knew he was Jesus, or he was the Christ, right? No, they didn't. Some of the Sanhedrin believed that he was at least an important prophet. At least. Did they believe more? Maybe some of them did. In the end, at least some of them did. But that there wasn't a majority of folks by any means, and you got to understand it's like the tide going in and out. New people come in, old people go out. It's just a constant cycle. That's the way it goes. So you can read how Pharisees invited him to dinner. And what did he do? He immediately started ripping them apart. And they say, Master, people are going to think that you're saying bad things about us with what you're saying. And he's like, make no mistake. Let me make it even clearer. You guys are dirtbags. And imagine that. Imagine being invited to dinner at someone's house, and then you start tearing them apart and criticizing them beyond belief. And they think that they're good and special and successful and righteous, and you pepper them with irrefutable logical arguments that they're actually garbage. Not only should you think about how they would react to you, right? But also imagine that the more like God someone is, the more you should expect that your interactions with that person will be like the interactions of people with Jesus. And so if that happened today, people would not walk away from that saying like, my goodness, this is just like it was in the New Testament, right? Praise to God because his glory is here again. That's not how people would react to this. They'd say, what an arrogant a-hole, right? Get out of my house, never talk to me again, and then they'd put you on full blast for the world to see in any avenue they had. They'd hit up blogs and comment boards and make videos about how much of a scoundrel you are, right? Which is exactly what they did to Jesus, minus the technology. They used the channels available at the time. Anywho, so back to this horse, right? There's more we can extract from this true story. Okay, so suppose you walk outside just as I'm punching the horse. If you just are catching, if you're just tuning in, like we watched this from the beginning. But you come outside just as I'm punching this horse, just wailing on as hard as I can. You're probably going to think something really weird is going on and something bad, right? Because poor horse, right? You won't be able to see from the distance that my foot's getting crushed. You certainly don't know how that feels because I guess from experience, you don't know how it feels to get stomped on by a horse until you are. You certainly wouldn't know that the whole reason I'm in this mess is because I'm taking pity on this poor starving horse and I'm feeding it stuff that I grew, going out of my way across the fence, across the safety line to feed this horse. And even if you did that sort of thing from time to time, I mean, I did that 100 times before this thing stepped on my foot, right? So there's like all these levels of learning that can happen from this true story that's also an analogy. Because most people won't even feed the horse once. They just won't care. We have this tendency as humans to evaluate whether we're going to attempt to do something about a problem. Let me back that up. We evaluate situations and decide whether we want to care about them, in part based on what good we think we can do about it. And that's I mean, I guess that's an okay survival strategy, but we're supposed to care about people who are suffering. And the more they're suffering, the more we're meant to care. And we're supposed to do whatever we can to help them. But even if we can't do anything about it, we're not supposed to just go on our merry way not caring. And but that's what people do. And they say, this is just too big for me. I can't even put this on my plate, whatever. So some people actually get in the octagon and they try to do something about it. And in order to do that, like I said, you got to cross the barbed wire fence. And all of a sudden, you're in harm's way. Because horses are big, and if they wanted to jack you up, they're going to jack you up. They're way bigger than you are. And it turns out that you can't love someone without giving them weapons to hurt you. That's a very, very, very important idea. Fact. It's a fact. So, if you're not in the arena, and you're not out there helping people who are in need, you're probably like the last person on the planet who can accurately assess the appropriateness of punching a horse, right? So, okay, so that's kind of extreme. But what if you've got like rules where you never cross the fence because you've been stomped on by a horse before, where you keep your distance? You know, people could think, wow, well, this is a cold person. They don't care. When in reality, they actually care more than you, and they've done things that you'd never do. And that's how they've learned the boundaries that they currently have, right? So, going back to Jesus, which is always a good thing, and then we go forward to him, which is even better. But going back to understanding the accounts of his life, there were countless times where he was what people would say is overly harsh with others. Now, it's shocking to reflect on how few people think that way, because that just goes to show you how few people actually read the scriptures. It's very abundantly obvious, story after story after story, where he just lights people up. And yeah, we could give examples, but whatever. So, how did he get that way? Why did he act that way? Well, in many cases, that harshness was a precondition to unlocking certain laws of heaven. They're not weird, cryptic secrets. It's just that they're just related to faith, honestly. So, if you want someone to receive something good, that can only be done against resistance, right? So, if you give people really nice things for free all the time, they're not going to appreciate it. And although factually they're better off, experientially they're not, because they won't have greater joy. Because you can't have joy from a gift that you don't appreciate. So, in being very interested in giving the gift, poke them a little bit to give them the opportunity to sense a little of the cost of it and to have a way of appreciating more of the value. But there are other facets of this, of why he was how he was, why he is how he is. And one of those facets is that he's been stomped on by a lot of horses, right? And so it's not a fear of being hurt or anything like that, but he understands that horses don't care, they'll just step on you, right? And this is mildly related to the last verse, the end of John chapter 3, where we see that he was not affected by compliments from people. He completely disregarded them. The reason is he'd spent his whole life receiving compliments from people from time to time, and then being shown shortly thereafter that it really doesn't matter what a person does to say thanks. In the very next second, or shortly thereafter, they can be there with a knife to twist it right in your back. Because humans are very unreliable creatures. And so, you didn't let it get to him. Anyway, those are some thoughts on feeding horses and getting stumped. As time winds on, there are going to be more opportunities for people to help each other. And as that unfolds, many of you see there are channels now to feed the horses. And those who do that get stopped. But if you don't do that, then you don't have these experiences yet, but you will. And at that time, it's going to become pretty important to have access to, know, and live these wise, I won't call them boundaries, but wise principles of interaction, so that you don't get hurt in ways that that aren't the most beneficial. Since it is very helpful to get, it is very helpful to suffer sometimes. But there are types of suffering that just weren't very helpful. So anyway, that's it. See ya.